Welcome to episode 2 of the Drivetime Podcast. This is the Global Auto Tech Podcast. The purpose of the podcast is to educate and a little bit of entertainment around how you do your job better. If you're working in automotive in any part of the industry, this podcast is designed to help you understand how tech is completely shaping the way that you will live and work. We know that automotive is going through a massive transformation and tech is reshaping everything from consumer journeys, dealer operations, how consumers buy, and particularly how they make changes. So this week, we're joined by the CEO and founder of Rightcharge, and we're going to get really into the detail of not only how we can help consumers make the right decisions when it comes to choosing EVs, but more particularly how you then live and charge the EV that you end up buying. So there's ZEV mandates and we've got to make sure that we're ready for it. So Charlie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Charlie, you set Rightcharge up about 5 years ago now. Just a bit of background about you. I think it's really helpful for anyone that doesn't already know you. I'm lucky I got to meet you about 3 years ago and we were working in e-commerce at the time. I was working in e-commerce at the time and you were bringing Rightcharge really front and centre. So just tell me a little bit about you and how you got to setting up Rightcharge and what it does.
My educational background, I was originally an engineer. I studied civil engineering at university, which has turned out to be mostly totally useless in what I do today, apart from maybe a good grounding in numbers and logic, which is obviously always helpful.
Yeah.
So how I got from there to running this business, I got really interested initially in climate when I was at university. So I was fortunate to be able to go to Australia for my third year of university. So I did an exchange to Melbourne University, and they've just got a slightly different approach to university education in that you can choose different modules and different subjects slightly outside of your core subject, which you can't do in Nottingham or the UK where I was studying before. And that meant that I could start to learn about climate science. I decided to do that because I'd watched a documentary called The Inconvenient Truth, which is the original Al Gore documentary, which maybe came out in 2009, 2010, and is sort of akin to a horror film if you care about the future of our planet. And for me, that was I suppose I was fascinated, but also sort of terrified by that situation because certainly what is now 15 years ago, climate was very much not a mainstream subject, and the sort of denier voices were still very strong at the time, which is very different today. And that's what really made me feel like I would want to, this is what I would like to try and get into for my career. I felt like there's a whole career of doing anything that helps to reduce carbon. I then got really interested in the energy grid because I realised that there's this massive transformation happening from your traditional gas-powered stations and your coal-powered stations through to solar and wind and all the other kind of elements of that come around it. So yeah, I came back to the UK after Australia. I found one job that I really, really wanted to do at a consultancy in London in their energy team, and so I applied for that one job only and put all my eggs into that basket, and I didn't get it. My friend and still friend, who was actually the best man at my wedding, he got the job.
No.
Yeah.
Oh God.
We were both in Australia together, and we both studied the same stuff. We both came back to the UK, both saw this one job, and he got it perfectly reasonably, and I didn't. So I ended up therefore on this slight detour in life, and I went to Geneva, and I worked at the particle collider at CERN for 2 years, which was just an opportunity. Obviously, I didn't want to turn down.
Yeah. Good work for the Hadron Collider.
I mean, kind of crazy how that all came about. But I ended up, working on a feasibility study as to how to build a 100-kilometre circumference tunnel under the Geneva Basin and avoid the limescale from the Alps for a couple of years, which was fun, but wasn't the sort of sustainable energy kind of route that I'd planned. So came back to London. I did a finance master's just to kind of get that commercial angle from my engineering background, and then I ended up at Octopus Energy, somewhat by chance. I just happened to know someone through a course I'd been through before, who had just joined as the CEO of a spin-out company called Octopus Electric Vehicles, which is now huge, as is the entire Octopus group. So I was the first employee into Octopus Electric Vehicles. I helped Fiona Howarth as she built that out into a real business. And for the 3 years I was at Octopus, my role expanded also to manage and lead on EV charging, whether that's new products and services or partnerships or innovation projects. So that was my grounding in EV. That was why I got into automotive, sort of purely by chance, to be honest. But yeah, that's where I am today. And then obviously launched the business then in 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, wow. I mean, I knew some of the story, but not all of the story. I didn't know about the hadron thing. That is incredible.
Right.
It's like, oh, I just pop down here and, think about nuclear atomic physics. So, as you do. So, you ended up in automotive probably by chance, but then thought, hey, it feels like there's something really interesting here that also fits that. I'm really passionate about sustainability. So it feels to me like that your purpose is climate, making sure that we educate this generation about what they can do, what each of us can sort of take responsibility for. I don't know about the the way that they educate people in Melbourne, but I'd love to know more. But it feels like it's quite it's really interesting. You can pick and choose. So when you launched, so you're at Octopus, and then how did you go from Octopus to going from that to a startup? Because that's a big leap. You're still pretty young at this stage in your life. So sort of talk me through how you kind of started it out and what was the inspiration for that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to be honest with you, I think that drive started way before I got into climate. So my original drive as a younger person, as a child, to be honest with you, was to start my own business and to run my own business. And that's because my grandfather did that, and that brought him and therefore our family sort of out of poverty in Swansea, which I've done my ancestry.com, and it goes back about, well, for as long as you can possibly go back in the records. And my ancestry is all from Swansea, and they're all coal miners. So my granddad was sort of the first in our family line to take us out of Swansea and into relative prosperity. And he did that through starting a company, and he through a local travel agency. Back in those days, you could earn a lot of money as a local travel agent, which you certainly can't now. And then my mum ran that business until I was born, and then my dad ran that business whilst I was young. And so I kind of grew up in that family business background, and as a result, that's just what I always wanted to do. And I had my first business ideas. My first one, I think, was when I was 10. I started a dog sitting business, which was also a joke at my wedding recently, that my mum ended up running it. So, and she's now very much involved in this business. So there's kind of an ongoing joke that it's really her behind everything, which is fairly true. And so coming into that Octopus job, I actually had a decision between going to a very big company at the time. So I'd applied for a role at Norway's oil and gas company, because they were looking at like solar deployment across the world, I think particularly like Mexico, South America. They also had this really interesting floating wind turbine projects, which they were doing in Hawaii and off the coast of Scotland. And I was offered the opportunity to be part of that team. But that was at the same time as I was doing an internship over the summer at Octopus. And so it was actually definitely a difficult decision. But at the end of the day, the reason I chose Octopus was because I wanted to get that experience of an early stage company and a startup, because I felt like that's more likely to teach me how to, go and do it myself. Yeah. So yeah, it was always in the back of my mind, I suppose, when I was at Octopus. And then, the reason I think I sort of left to start the company when I did was just because it was the first moment in my life where I felt like I had an idea that I could really visualize, and I'd learned some of the skills about launching products and services at Octopus, which is a large part of launching a business. And so for the first time, I felt like comfortable enough that I could give it a go. Yeah.
I was lucky. I heard the CEO Greg Jackson on a podcast with Rory Sutherland, and that was just really interesting. And they have 3 elements to the business. They have the energy business, how you buy your electricity and consumption. Then they have the Kraken technology business, and they have the EV business, which is the leasing part of their business, where they'll do salary sacrifice. So for anyone that doesn't know that, that's what they do. But what I really love about, and what I think is a big gap, and this is probably where we're going to come into, where you set up the ability for consumers to understand how they get charge the right tariff, because there's obviously changes to the price of electricity, is that how we as consumers buy everything else is really transparent. We can see the price of our energy and we can choose whether we want to stay on that tariff or whether we want to go with a different supplier. So that, I suppose, was the background of where you thought, hey, hang on a minute, I think, why don't we do that over here in this space? Because as you see, the writing is on the wall, but what I think is really funny, you've just bringing back to your kind of coal mining beginnings. So you started your ancestry in energy production, but it was just a very different type of energy production.
It's true, I hadn't thought
from
about
the
that
ground. And it's like, the apple didn't fall far from the tree.
That's very true.
So yeah, so just in terms of just setting it into context, I did a bit of research before you came in, which is, as of the end of February 2025, there are 1.4 million fully electric cars in the UK, which equates to approximately just over 4% of the current UK cars on the road. So 34, if we take that there's 34 million cars on the road, and that was taken from a source. Actually, ZapMap, which are probably a partner to you, so they help you find, local charging. So just coming back to, you've come out of energy ancestrally and also and professionally, and then you saw an opportunity to try and make it easier. So one of the things that I'm really sort of trying to help, I suppose, unlock is how can you make it easier for customers to buy cars, make it easy, because we all research online and we're so used to researching in every other vertical, whether we're buying trainers, dog food, whatever, consumers, we have choice, and we also have the internet in our pocket on our phones. So just when you were setting it up, what were the kind of absolutely core principles of what you think, right, to be able to make this thing work, we're going to have access to these sources of data. And we spoke to Tom and Harvey in the first episode, it was about how you access data. So I suppose data and right pricing is going to be front and centre of all of that. So where did you start?
I think, to your point, it's really about supporting the consumer and making it easier for them. Fundamentally, that's, I suppose, full credit to give to Octopus really for where, my own education from a business perspective in terms of how important and impactful that can be if you do that correctly, supporting consumers in the right way, being transparent, having simple messaging is something that Octopus do very well and brought, I think, to the market with a different tone of voice and breaking things down for people that had previously been either too complicated or too boring for anyone to care about. But if you then, I think at the time, looked at the journey for consumers to buy an electric vehicle, you didn't have that same type of offering in the market for quite a lot of the buying process and buying journey. And so really, Rightcharge was essentially my effort to take those lessons that I'd learned from Octopus and apply those initially to the charge point installation process, actually. So we looked at the market at the time, and it was quite clear that there were a whole number of different brands that individuals had to become accustomed to. So, you've chosen your vehicle, that you can charge at home, but the question is then, which charge point do you install? I think at the time, most people were just going for the first recommendation from their dealership because they'd never heard of anything else. And so therefore, it was evident that they were really missing out on opportunities to save because that charge point might not have certain features that would help them to, say, integrate with their solar panels to make the most of excess energy coming off their solar, or maybe schedule automatically to cheaper periods of the night. And so we developed a fairly straightforward comparison system that would take a bit of information about the consumer, what's their requirements, do they have solar, will they be charging overnight, and then we sort of present them with a list of the different charge points, and we created consistency actually for the first time across products and created the ability for comparison because I think before Rightcharge was in the market, pricing was all based on different underlying assumptions. So it was literally impossible to compare charge point like for like. And features were described in different ways. So you could go to one provider and they'd tell you it does all these things in certain language and it's this price. You'd go to another provider and they'd use totally different language sometimes for the same things. They'd give you another price, but it was based on a whole different set of assumptions. So complete minefield for people to navigate. So that's what we brought together. So it was the product comparison part of the journey. And then it was like, well, ultimately, actually, as well as choosing the right product, you need to make sure you're buying from an installation company that's not going to mess you around and cares about you as a customer as well. So we built a network of installation companies across the country, and we've been working with them now for best part of 5 years. So it's been evident which ones truly care about the customer. So we've been able to narrow that group down to really high performing suppliers. So we get the right charge point, the right installer, and the right price. And the right price came from the way we've designed the marketplace structure for this is you put in your postcode and you'll find if there are 6 or 7 different offers from different installers for the same charger, we'll just give you the cheapest. So, you get that offering kind of bundled up for you from the website. Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of things that you mentioned there that I absolutely think are their parallels in automotive and how you buy cars. And I think we'll come on to the role of the retailer, because you said sometimes they would just take the first thing, and it could just be that somebody's dropped a leaflet in and therefore you just get handed the leaflet rather than, oh, there's an independent, you should be able to, let's hold your hand in this experience. But comparison of offer A versus offer B is really difficult when you buy a car. So how do you compare this thing with that thing? And it's really difficult without having millions of tabs open. It's just, we see that, still. And you go, why is that not just simplified, that you just pull? And I know that there are now tools that allow you to compare things like TCO, total cost of ownership. So that as a conversation, I think, is one of those areas where there's either been a lack of training or a lack of consistent training or a lack of the access to that information, so that whoever is working in the retailer can help the consumer make the right choice. Because often when you're selling a car or when a consumer is buying a car, they kind of know what it is roughly they're looking for, or you can help them just facilitate them into the right thing for them, rather than it being a kind of, cloak and dagger sales process, which is kind of what we're trying to move away from, really, as how we professionalize the industry. So the ability to simplify was the other thing that you talked about, which is make the language the same across everything. So if it's 5 hours, it's 5 hours, not 357 minutes, whatever. I can't even do the fast maths. But so I think that's the other thing. And then the ability to get reviews and actually slim down the right partner. So whether we're looking for a plumber or a charge installer, knowing people always want to go for somebody that's recommended because it's a new thing. It's really difficult, isn't it, to choose whether you want to have somebody you've never heard of that has been vetted by a company that's got experience of this thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So just as you've been around for 5 years, what have been, as you've kind of moved into this space, what have been the biggest, for you, do you think, surprises in either speed of adoption or just as the industry has migrated or as consumers behave? And we can come and talk about fleet in a minute, because they really were the early adopters, weren't they? How taxation or legislation is changing adoption.
It's fairly well understood. I think the last maybe 2 years-ish have not seen as much growth in EV as people thought. Without going too far into the wider industry, etc. I think that's impacted things from an industry perspective. Certainly, I think to an extent, every stakeholder in the market has probably felt a little bit of pain because of that, because whilst the growth rates, for a typical market, if you've got a market for apples that's growing at 15% per year, everyone would be getting into apples. But when you thought the growth rate was going to be 50% per year, the investment prior to that has been so much, so much so that to cater for that growth, but that growth doesn't happen, and then everyone therefore has to kind of readjust a bit. So I think therefore it's been, a slightly tougher couple of years for the market, but there's very strong signals now that we are coming out of that period. And I think the next couple of years, there's good reason to believe they're going to be much more exciting and very, very interesting. You mentioned, the ZEV mandate. So much discussion about that, obviously, the last year or so. The results, though, in the first year have just been so positive. And even the manufacturers who I think were quite nervous about not hitting targets and having penalties don't actually seem to have managed it, and don't have those penalties because there's good flexibilities in the regulation. So when you combine the ZEV mandate in the UK, along with some of the developments in the vehicle technology for EVs and the price drops that come from that, particularly perhaps unfortunately, but in reality is from China. The next couple of years, I think, are going to be incredibly exciting. So yeah, I think it's probably not been that consistent growth curve that everyone forecasts and never happens. There's been a little bit of a wobble in the road the last couple of years, but now we're on for a very exciting 5 years at least, actually.
I think you're absolutely right. So, I mean, we're in 2025,
Yeah.
and it's the road to zero by 2030.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things that I think we're going to see. I don't think any graph. There's a great book I love called the Code of the Extraordinary Mind, and it talks about entrepreneurialism being a series of, it's not just a straight line. You're going to go yay, and then the line might come back up again. You go woohoo, and you go, oh god, no, here we go again.
It's a total roller coaster.
It is an absolute roller coaster, and I think what we've seen in the last couple of years is residual values took a bit of a tumble because certain people dropped the price of their new vehicles. Let's not mention his name, chainsaw bureaucracy guy. So yeah, that's been an interesting one. And then there's also uncertainty, weirdly, about nobody thinks that their engine might be as perfect as it is in 5 years' time, but everyone seems to think the battery needs to be as perfect as it was in 5 years' time. And there are lots of things now that we're learning about how often you charge, whether you charge fully, whether you use a fast charger. I think all of these things, areas of knowledge that lead, or lacks of those knowledge, lead to uncertainty, which leads to behaviour, which means if you're not sure about something, you won't do it. If you don't understand something, you won't buy it.
Yeah.
So I think that's another area where, with education and knowledge, and also with the tariff thing, you won't be able to buy a petrol car after a certain point. You will only have the option of buying full EV, or there'll be something else that comes along in the meantime that will replace it. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in that kind of curve in the next 5 years of woohoo and we're going to see some of that. So coming back to the point about education, Charlie, so largely you're there to educate consumers and make that easy. And there's a combination of at-home charging, which is where you're talking about making sure that you've got the right at-home charger, which can connect into your own energy supplier. So you can do things like charge overnight. I charge mine on an app. I make sure that it sets it up so it only charges between 12 and 5.
Right.
And I happen to be an Octopus customer, but it doesn't mean that mine doesn't necessarily get to the right tariff at the minute because it doesn't have the integration point. But that's following, I'm sure. So is there an area of education that would help, or that there's a gap that you think, like the space that we operate in my day job is helping retailers with technology and with information. Have we equipped them enough to help make a consumer, or help a consumer make a decision when it comes to EV choice?
I think the more that we can do, we literally cannot do enough from that perspective in terms of marketing the benefits, the realities of living with an electric vehicle, and far more maybe than you might normally need to sell a petrol diesel vehicle, because the general population is just faced with a constant barrage of misinformation from the media. So we are, as an industry, constantly on the back foot, because not only do we have to educate consumers about a new technology, we have to do that whilst starting from a starting point of them being totally misinformed and having completely incorrect beliefs about so much stuff.
Yeah.
And, I think like a really good way to measure the temperature on people's understanding of electric vehicles is on BBC News. If you look at like the Have Your Say comments, and I guess right at the beginning we were talking about the general understanding and awareness and acceptance of climate science back in 2010. Mm-hmm. To some degree, we're kind of like still there a bit when it comes to electric vehicles. The sort of general consensus outside of people who drive an EV or work in EVs is the general consensus is often wrong. Like, they have misunderstandings about so many aspects. So yeah, to your question, if you're a retailer, you've got a big challenge on your hands, but it's an opportunity, isn't it? Because you're part of the solution, and the more that you can do to get the right information out there to consumers, the better. Yeah.
So thinking of misinformation then, is it, because part of me thinks, controversially, EVs, the production of the batteries is not necessarily the most sustainable thing for the planet.
No.
So how do we counter that?
I don't know, it might just be me, but I'm like, I'm always totally convinced by charts, which is probably not a great way to communicate to most people. But there's a really quick way to show visually how soon that increase in emissions from creating a battery versus creating an engine, or essentially creating an engine, I suppose, how quickly that's offset. And in a nutshell, it's like, I think it's 10 to 15,000 miles. So you're talking, for most vehicles, that's within the first 1 to 2 years.
Right.
And then for the entire lifetime of the vehicle from that moment onwards, you're cutting carbon. So easiest way to think about it is every electric vehicle that's manufactured, so long as it actually is used, which obviously they're all going to be used. So if it's used for 10, say 15 years, it will save an enormous amount of CO2 versus that individual buying a petrol car and using it for 10, 15 years. So the numbers are fairly obvious from that perspective. And you generally are looking at least a 50 to 60% saving in CO2 over the lifetime of the vehicle. But that's getting better all the time because it's so linked to how we generate electricity. So as our grid gets cleaner, so does our entire fleet of EVs across the country, which is obviously very cool.
Yeah. That is really cool. And I think I love some of the stuff when I was talking about the podcast I heard Greg Jackson talking about how they've now set up things like the fan club. So if there's a wind turbine and it's a windy day, you get free electricity.
Yeah.
Like,
it's awesome. I mean, there's so many things that are going to be like come to market like that for electric vehicle drivers that are going to be super exciting. Ways you can basically help to manage the grid with your battery at home. You can fall asleep, wake up in the morning and you've made a few quid just by plugging your car in. Like that's the future we'll have in the next few years.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing where it's and we think about, we had an event earlier in the year, last year actually, so I keep thinking of having a new year. So we had an event last year. Quite a lot of the people that we see in retailers have been in retailers for a really long time. They know what they're doing. They've got they've got so much experience. But when you start talking about how can you explain the difference between pence per gallon, because that's a language we're so used to.
Sure.
Suddenly, it's like when you have a currency change, you went from pounds, shillings, and pence to we've gone from to decimalisation of money, and it's the same transition. So there's how I think about how much it costs me to get from point A to point B is different because the way that we measure it is different, the way that we price it is different. Yeah. And I now charge up every night, and I feel kind of slightly smug that all of my local mileage is done, charged overnight, and most of my local journeys are done dropping my son at the station, or I go to the station myself. But longer journeys, then obviously I'm in a hybrid, so I use the petrol engine part of it. But where I can, I use battery if I can do. But I think that's the bit where, as we're changing the measure of currency or the measure of cost, it's how to think about that differently. If you were advising retailers in how they could equip their teams to think differently about that, what would you advise them to do in how they explain it to customers or how they equip themselves? Because normally when you sell me a car, you don't care where I fill it up. You don't have to. It's not your problem. But I am going to have that decision part of my, if I'm buying an EV and I'm changing from what I've always known to something totally different, how can they help a consumer on that, in that experience?
I think there's two tricks that can work really well. One is to equate it to a metric they know, then they're familiar with, we are familiar with, obviously. So, pence per litre is like you said, it's a metric everyone understands. Roughly £1.50 these days. I actually sort of don't know because I don't use it. But
it depends where you fill up. £1.30. I go to Morrison's because it's cheaper. I always kind of drive a little bit. If I see it over £1.40, I'm like, nope. Just keep driving.
I haven't filled up with petrol for quite a long time, so I'm a bit out of the loop. So most customers are going to be way more familiar than I am. But if you equate like home charging to pence per litre, it's going to be tiny. I think it's 10 times lower, roughly. So firstly, that's a great way to do it. Can you put that into their language? I think a second thing that is super helpful when you're talking about charging versus refueling your petrol diesel vehicle is just to try and explain the fact that there is actually variety, because your instinct coming from a petrol car is that refueling means going in your car to a location, plugging it in or putting a petrol pump in and standing by that vehicle whilst it charges. And that's what everyone's like on a subconscious level is thinking, I think, when they first come into EVs. So one great analogy is, and it's used commonly for good reason, is that charging your electric vehicle can be more like charging your iPhone than refueling your car. And then you kind of start to think, oh, okay, actually, I just plug it in at home, it charges overnight, I wake up in the morning and it's full. 2/3 of homeowners in the UK have driveways, so for the majority of car owners that's the case. Obviously there's a different question if you don't have a driveway. That's another challenge for retailers, but there's really good answers to that question as well. But putting it into those sort of frameworks that people relate to, I think is a great way to start.
I think one of the ways that I balanced it with myself. So when I remember 2008 when everything was expensive and the whole world was upside down, but you noticed directly how much it cost to fill up. And if it was over £100, you kind of go, oh God, you really feel it. And then you spend less in the supermarket, or you spend less on that coffee, or you spend less. You can't justify spending money. So when things are tighter, or if you think there's cost of living and you can't control the price at the pumps, it could go up because of something happening in the Middle East, or because something's happening in America, or something's happening in Russia, or the world's on fire. But you can't control what's going on at the pumps. But actually you can fix your energy price, which brings me on to, this is going to be airing in April, at the point when the energy price cap is set to rise. So just talk about that and how people that use your platform can actually start to think about, because it's Rightcharge for a reason. It's about not only finding the right charger, but it's about understanding how you can then shop around for tariffs. And if we talk about overnight charging, just explain what consumers should be looking for as we're coming into a point, and what retailers, because this is a B2B podcast, it's going out to an industry, who will be advising consumers about how they then make that decision or choose their tariffs.
Absolutely. So if we talk about the vehicle owners who are fortunate to have a driveway, who, like I said, it's at least sort of 2/3 of the population, they will probably come into the experience of owning an EV on a standard home energy tariff. Like everyone, you pay X pence per unit of energy, regardless of what time of the day you use that electricity. But there are tariffs on the market that will offer you a lower rate for each unit of energy overnight. Essentially you get two rates. You get a day rate and a night rate. And for EV owners, that's transformational, because you're now dropping your cost to charge your car by 2/3, 70%, sometimes 75%, which is obviously crazy. I mean, imagine, like you said, going to a petrol pump and finding fuel for 75% less.
That'd be amazing. That'd be, yes, please.
It's just, you don't get that opportunity, whereas you do with EV. So as a retailer, that's an amazing thing to be sharing with your consumers, that they can actually reduce their charging down to, I mean, it becomes like £5 to do 200 or 300 miles. It's just like crazy numbers. We offer a comparison service. So we built the UK's first energy tariff comparison tool that actually works for EV owners, which takes account of what vehicle you drive, how far you drive it and how you charge it, as well as how big is your home and where do you live. So drivers can go through that, enter their information, and then they can see the results for all the different tariffs and which one would be cheapest for them on an annual basis. So clearly I would recommend using that as a consumer. It just makes that journey very simple. And then, you've got public charging and on-street charging, which is a little harder to really optimize for cost, but it's still certainly possible. You mentioned ZapMap. There's also, Octopus as well have an app for finding chargers. So there's certainly ways to optimize those costs on the road as well.
And that's so cool. So the Octoverse is, they kind of have like little, let's make up some new words, but it is quite true. So if you are a customer, and I haven't used it myself because I have a home charger and I'm fortunate, then there are certain black spots in the country where there are some gaps in the public charging infrastructure, which I think is something that needs to be addressed personally. But for the majority of places, you do have access to a lot of public charging. But the Octoverse thing works in a way that if you have got, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong because you're the expert, is if you're an Octopus customer, you can then set it up so you can use the app to charge anywhere, and it goes on your home tariff. Is that right? Or it just goes through your home bill?
That's correct. It goes on your home bill. So it kind of consolidates that cost for you as a consumer. So you're paying it all on your home energy bill, which is nice. And like you say, if you look at these apps, we mentioned probably the Zap Map, Electroverse is the Octopus version. There's a few others, but once you look at these apps that show you all the charges across the UK, you really start to realise quite how much the public charging there is in the country. And we're talking about tips for retailers. That's another one. I think that's a real aha moment for consumers. If you get an iPad or a big tablet as big as possible and you show them a map with all the pins, 75,000 pins now across the country, and it's a really visceral way of showing consumers quite how many chargers there are out there.
Yeah.
And then, like you say, you can use these solutions to make access to those networks really easy. In the old days, when I got into EV, you had to have 20 different accounts with different apps and different cards for each different network. That's totally not necessary these days. You can easily combine it into one way to access and one way to pay.
Yeah. I know I'll be talking to Sarah from Paythrough at some point. So the EV Cafe is doing lots of work to help educate, and they have different guests on. I think you've been on there already, but it's like they're looking at some point when we think about the tech in the vehicle, that at some point we're not that far away from the car being the wallet. So as you have Apple Pay,
totally,
the car will do it for you.
Yeah.
So it automatically, you just set up the thing and it does it for you, which is really exciting, because then only have I not got to get out of my car in the rain and fill it up, I can, I don't even need to think about paying for it. You haven't got to have cash or any kind of payment.
No, totally. And that's something we're offering soon at Rightcharge. So we actually have a similar solution to the Electroverse, which is both for consumer and for fleets. At Rightcharge, we have a public charging card for fleets, which comes with that app to see all of the different available charges. Plus, then we can make sure that employees are being reimbursed for exactly what they spend on home charging. But very soon we'll be rolling out that plug and charge technology, so that on certain networks to begin with, and then more and more networks over time, you literally just have to plug the vehicle in. There's a handshake to recognize the vehicle and the charge point, and then all of the payment is managed in the background. So that actually becomes very much like charging a Tesla. Tesla have had that type of experience for so many years, mainly because they have a Tesla network and Tesla vehicle, so it's super simple.
Yeah.
Whereas when you have 1,000 different networks and dozens of different car manufacturers, it becomes quite complicated. But it's being solved, and it's coming to the market. Yeah.
So I did the thing where I think one thing that is quite good is when you have got an EV chargeable or a vehicle that you can charge, you get all the cool car parking spaces.
I know, yeah. I know.
It's like, there are spaces before I couldn't park here and now I will.
That's a real hidden perk of owning an EV, yeah.
So I think there are some really, and we can cover this off in the fast kind of fact section. I think that'd be really cool. But it's driving in snow is so much better with an EV because you haven't got to use the brakes. So we'll cover that. We'll come back and cover that off. So thinking about tech in the vehicle, what's coming that consumers can expect from EVs?
I mentioned earlier this idea of plugging your car in, going to bed, and you wake up in the morning and you've made some money. So the really boring name for that in the industry is vehicle to grid. So you can't imagine a more boring name, like vehicle to grid. So dull for such
Says what it does.
Yeah. So Ron Seal. So I guess firstly we have to find a new name for that. But the idea and the reality behind it is so cool and so exciting. And as we're building more solar and we're building more wind turbines to power the grid, we're also making the generation of electricity less consistent and less reliable, which is a slightly annoying consequence of going from dirty gas and coal that you can pretty much just turn off and on to wind and solar that you can't turn off and on. But the solution to that variability of power is to store it. So when you've got loads of wind being generated, because it's windy, then you want to be able to put that somewhere where you can then use it later. So overnight when the wind's not blowing and you don't have much solar or wind. The challenge is where to store that. And we don't, as a country, and this is pretty common for most countries, we don't have much storage because it's not historically been really needed, because we did have this ability to just turn gas up and down basically. But when you think about it now, as you mentioned at the beginning, 1.4 million pure electric vehicles, the batteries in electric vehicles are massive, right, by any standard. And not to go down a rabbit hole, but one crazy stat about EV batteries, I think, is they are literally made up of actual batteries. So you have like this massive battery pack, but inside that is, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of individual batteries just packed together. Anyway, so you've got like all of these like packs of like millions, if not, I don't know, billions of little batteries across the country. Why not use them?
Yeah.
So vehicle to grid is the concept of not only just being able to charge up your vehicle so you can then go and use it for driving, but also being able to then discharge it and send the power back from your vehicle into the grid so that overnight, when the grid needs it, you can actually power your neighborhood from your garage. And the economics work out in that when there's, lots of wind blowing, electricity is cheap, so you can buy it cheap. When there's no wind blowing, it's expensive, so you can sell it at a higher rate.
And you can this is the good thing about tech, is you can automate that you top up. So my neighbour, I've got a neighbour, they have an EV anyway, but they've just installed, we don't have gas in our village, we have oil, which is deeply, unpopular, but it is what it is. So it was either oil or very expensive electricity to heat a house, and I inherited the oil heating system when I moved in, but the whole neighbourhood have it. One of my neighbours has just installed the heat pump, that kind of, and they've got, literally, he was explaining to me, they've bought these big batteries that are on the side of their house, and the heat exchange pump basically keeps their house warm. They fill the battery up at night at the cheapest rate. I think it's 7p a kilowatt hour, 7p, and then they keep their house warm. They've taken like 400 or whatever it is a month out of their heating bill. It's mental.
It's crazy.
And they can also then charge their cars. They charge their cars. They've got solar panels. They're completely green.
Yeah.
But they heat their house. They love it because it's the entire house and it's converted into their existing heating system. They've not had to put like a whole new set of radiators or underfloor heating or different things. It sort of converts it and just converts what they've already got. So the hot water still runs around the system. It just keeps it at a constant temperature. So I think that's when you say about thinking about how we consume electricity differently and then really drive down, the big point of this is that you're saving cost.
Yeah.
So you're charging it when it's cheaper.
Yeah.
And then you're using it when it's, you're using it when you need it.
Yeah. And so, I think that's just such a key point, right? Like 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, it was relatively true that being green meant paying more. Now it's the total opposite in every respect.
Yeah.
If you choose the green choice, whether it's your EV or solar at home or, heating, it's going to be cheaper as well. It's going to save you money. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. So thinking about, there's we've talked about smart chargers or how we use tariffs. Are there any other areas where, as an industry, we should be either asking questions differently, or are there things that sources of really useful information where, because I often find, Charlie, when you look at the OEMs, the manufacturers put out information about EVs and it's so complicated. There's reams and reams of data. What can we do to simplify it?
That's such a good question. So I went through the car buying process about a year ago for the first time, actually, for an EV. And I was coming at that also as actually the first time I've bought a vehicle since I was like a teenager. And did I actually buy them then? Probably not. No, I got my first one.
You would have bought a shed like most of my kids do. You buy a really old, terrible thing.
My first car was a Rover 25 that I inherited from my granddad. And my second car wasn't a car, it was a van, because I used to race motorbikes. So I had a transit van that I put my bike in the back of. So this was the first time that I've actually gone out and bought a car. And yeah, there's to an extent, buying a vehicle, there's just a lot of information and you can never really get away from that. It's the reality. There's a lot to think about, a lot of factors that are important to different people in different ways. How can we improve it? I think, just to pick one point, perhaps, when it comes to electric vehicles, I don't think we do a good job of really describing the realities of range very well today. It's tempting and easy as a retailer to just simply quote the WLTP or the sort of regulatory ranges, which everybody knows are over and above what you would typically get in your electric vehicle. And clearly the result of that is just confusion, disappointment, bad reputation, and then, that getting spread across people who don't have electric vehicles. So I would say one area that I think could do better as an industry is to just give better information about this is the average you could expect, and this is what you'd get in the summer, and this is what you're likely to get in the winter.
Yeah.
Be
honest.
Be
Just be honest
be
about
honest.
it. Don't say it's 150 miles when it's 120, or just be honest about it. I think you're right. Managing expectations, because if you drive off and you think, oh, that's not what they said I was going to get, and then because you in your head you work out how many miles you need to do or whatever. So it's really important, to be honest.
Totally.
I think the one thing that I went through a similar car buying process last September, and I bought a hybrid, so I'm very happy with that. I actually think I could have gone full EV, but like you said, the range that I ended up with isn't the range that was advertised, and I waited for the one that had the longer range. And I'm thinking, that hasn't got a longer range at all. But the thing that really surprised me from a retail experience was they didn't charge it up.
Right.
So I went to pick it up, and it wasn't charged up, and they went, oh, we'll fill it up for you. And I went, didn't you charge it up? So this is my first time driving a hybrid, and I'd never. So I don't even think I test drove one. I just knew that I wanted to drive it, and they did the big reveal. I had a great experience, but they didn't charge it up. Like, why didn't you just do that?
I think that's one example of quite a few things you could easily do as a retailer to take away like a whole load of annoying pain points that you have to learn when you first get the vehicle. So just as an example, it is so easy, and would be so easy, to charge the vehicle up when you give it to the driver, so they don't have to then go and have a difficult experience on a public charging network they've never planned for, they've never experienced for the first time, which is always going to end in tears. But also, just I would definitely say, I think new buyers just need to be made aware of the fact that they can access these solutions that mean they don't need to have 20 different apps and 20 cards, because I think in a lot of cases people aren't told this, and then they have to just go and learn the hard way, or they have to go and learn from forums. And clearly, as a dealership or as a retailer of any type, it's so simple to provide that information. Just literally provide a leaflet that has that and some other information, for example, about home charging. So I think retailers, did certainly some of them do a great job of this, and I would say most do a reasonably good job, but actually, if not a great job, of recommending a home charge point, which is great. But I still don't think there's a lot of information out there about tariffs, and so it's just such a missed opportunity, because you're letting your customer go out there into the wild and spending 3 times just to figure it out, and then they spend 3 times on refueling than they need to, potentially for the first year or so before someone tells them. But you could do that, and you could get that kind of cred from the customer.
I love that. Get some cred. So the other thing I think would be really great, and I kind of do this, it'd be so great if, as a retailer, as a car retailer, they have these amazing facilities, particularly the franchise networks. They've got beautiful showrooms that are largely empty with free Wi-Fi and charge points potentially outside. So it's an opportunity for me where you could really drive loyalty for me as a customer. If you said to me, hey, we're going to give you cheaper charging if you ever wanted to come and work here, then you've kind of got cheaper charging, or we'll do whatever. Or you can book a charger at certain times of the day when we know we're not busy, because you have to have a certain amount of charge on an EV to be able to do a service on it, to actually do certain things, I think. So, but I think that would be to the point where the guy that I bought the car from, or the garage I bought the car from, didn't charge it for me on the first charge. Like, why wouldn't you do that? So I went outside and I was really disappointed. I was thinking, I'm going to be able to drive off under my own battery steam, and I couldn't. I was like, oh, crestfallen. But it was really, it was disappointing. So I think there are lots of things where if you just think about what would delight me as a customer, or what would delight not just me, but any customer, if you're making that transition, it would be so simple to do those little, get the cred. I love that. I think we should do that.
Is that a word people still use?
I think we should bring it back in. If they're not using it now, I think we should have a get the cred campaign on EVs.
There's a moment that proves I'm a father of a 2-year-old child, and definitly not still in my 20s.
I'm smart.
Kudos? Is that what people say?
Kudos to you. I hate that word, but I think it's really fun. No, not a fan. So, I think get the cred could be a new thing.
Yeah, and I don't know, Jackie, as you're talking, I think it's an opportunity for retailers to take advantage of the fact that people are out there looking for this information. So, be the source of information and use it as a customer acquisition tool. So, maybe have even a pop-up in your dealership where people can come in and ask questions, or run lectures is too formal, but like run sessions where you can share information about owning and driving an EV. Surely you'd attract a whole load of people from the local area that want to learn that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's not about test drive, it's about experiences now. So actually the EV experience is a different one. So I remember Facebook did some great work a while ago where they talked about the benefits of EV. It's not like the sound system sounds incredible in an EV because you haven't got the engine noise. See, there's loads of research outside of just the EV space that means that the EV is actually a cooler thing to have because the sound is better. Coming back to driving in snow, I had my first experience of this. In November, I had to go and pick up somebody from a station, not in my normal route, and that involved lots of hilly roads, and it snowed and nothing really was gritted, and I could see cars all over the place. They'd kind of gone whoop and gone off the road, and I thought, oh, hang on a minute, if I put it into battery, you take your foot off the accelerator and the thing slows itself down. You don't need to touch the brakes. So when I grew up learning to drive, I'm in my early 50s, when nothing was automated, we didn't even have power steering. It was a proper experience. My first car was a Ford Cortina, by the way.
I don't even know what that is.
Oh my God, you don't know what a Ford Cortina is?
I don't know what that is.
It's like a massive rectangle.
Okay, I'll look it up.
It's a big square thing. My sister couldn't drive very well and it looked more like a Fiesta by the time she'd finished. So just know that she couldn't parking. It was fun, but it was cheap and it was funny. But back then, it was learning how to drive once you'd passed your test was really interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that was the biggest thing for me, was learning that when you take your foot off the brake or you take your foot off the accelerator, it slows itself down. So to your point about having experiences, learning how you drive differently, how brake regeneration operates, how the difference between hybrids, like a true EV, whatever the hybrid technology is that allows you to make the right decision, I think is a great idea.
Yeah.
So I think that might be a call to action for anyone owning a retailer, to try and get some experiences in to help people learn about it.
Totally. I suppose this happens with test drives naturally, doesn't it? But I think extended test drives with EVs is got to be a good thing.
Yeah, sure.
Because not just experiencing driving it around the block, but also charging it, for example, is something that I think can only be good for someone making a decision. And as you all know, once you're used to driving an electric vehicle, it would feel so weird to go back, because driving a petrol diesel vehicle, although I grew up loving driving with like a manual transmission, and I used to race motorbikes, so I enjoy like that experience. But these days I would just find it such a faff and hassle if I had to go and drive a petrol, even if it's automatic, because the electric vehicle is just so much smoother. It's such a nicer experience driving it around. And which is great, because that experience is there waiting for. You mentioned 4% of vehicles today are electric, so 96% of the population are yet to realise that actually there's this much better way of getting around.
And the big shift is going to be now we're going to have a lot more affordable stock coming in. So we've got now manufacturers bringing in stock that is just purely EV, and we see lots of new entrants coming into an existing retailer base where you've got lots of curious customers. I think it's going to be a really interesting time. Just bringing this section to a close, it's been super interesting, particularly hearing your story about, your work from climate, being passionate about reducing carbon. I didn't realise you were a secret nuclear physicist.
I'm not, for the record.
But you work there, so therefore you must be. I'm not one, but I know some. But I think there's, as we see EVs really ramp up, the ability to choose not only the right car, but how you charge it is going to be really vital. So thank you so much, not only for all the work that you do to make it accessible for consumers and retailers to learn more about this space, but I think it's going to be great to see sort of what comes next when we go from 4% to much more of a uniform adoption of EVs, in general life. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
It's been great. Thank you.